The other thing that's happening now is the philosopher also as prophet can be like, the thing coming is so severe that if it occurs, you won't have a chance to go to the doctor. You need to get
Right.
better now, right?
Right.
Whereas,
And this is like an individual line between good and evil is within your own heart. This is like each individual's moral responsibility to take their karmic journey.
yeah,
Not like, oh, well, I'll just wait till it's broken and then I'll fix it.
yeah,
It's like, no, 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 no. Like, we need to do this before it breaks. Like,
yes,
this is not something inconsequential that we can just let break and we'll get to it next week and whatever.
that's the key.
This is like, this is our will to live. If this breaks, like, we're done.
Yes,
And like,
and,
that's actually like a way more serious
yes.
claim. And so, how do you communicate the gravity of a situation to somebody who is too psychologically immature to absorb the gravity of something greater than them? Because they
So,
are only listen to what they can understand.
yes,
And if they can only understand something that's beneath them, how do you get them to listen to something that's above them?
yes. Is an excellent question. So first off, I think this is extremely important because what it means is the philosopher as pharmacist is always at a disadvantage by definition. It will
Yeah, yeah,
always
sure.
seem as if they're not doing anything because the
Yeah.
thing they're telling you to do is that once it appears it's too late. And the pharmacist is dealing, the philosopher is dealing with avoiding the bad in success, which makes it seem like there is no bad, right? So the
Yeah.
technician,
And so we're going to encourage each other to be ignorant and delusional and die in a fiery crash.
yes, yeah, that's right.
Rather than like, let's have a tough conversation and fly this boat together or
Yeah.
whatever. Sorry, the metaphors are mixing all over the
No,
place,
no,
but
but that's well, actually, I wanted to say earlier, I think mixed metaphor, the Bible shows us is important because that keeps the mind fluid, right? Like we've
right.
we've actually been trained in school to
Yeah, I'm
think
just
mixed.
so used to apologizing for it because everybody hates mixed metaphors
No,
because everybody is a little flat plane and they
yeah,
can't handle the sphere. And so I'm
no, I'm
I'm so
extremely critical.
traumatized into taking that step into complexity
Oh
because
yeah,
I'm so used to people shutting me down.
well,
And
there's a few things we're taught in school. We're taught that a mixed metaphor is a mistake, but by definition, a mixed metaphor would be the only way to point toward a higher dimensionality, right? The
right,
other
and
thing,
that's the only way to talk meaningfully is to
yes,
speak in mixed metaphors.
yeah,
And so
yeah, yeah. That's
I'm
what,
saying the only way for me to speak meaningfully is to use words about God and the divine and
yes,
mysticism and
yes,
transcendence. And
yes.
people are like, "Well, my metaphorical substrate makes no sense of that, so I'm not going to listen
Yes.
to you."
Yeah. So what's happened is you had the
And
age
so,
of
how do you communicate through that different language of the metaphorical substrate that is the spiritual nature of the thing that is internally
yes,
or fundamentally an internal battle or something
yes.
like that?
We went
So
through
how
an
do you
a
externally encourage somebody to internally battle such that they can be open,
yes,
such that the consciousness of the external relation can actually contribute to a harmony?
100%.
Something, something more like that. Yeah.
100%. As just a note, I think basically we went through an age of understanding as presence. Then we went through one of understanding as deconstruction. And now we're in an age of understanding as mixing or saturation, to use Alex Ebert's language. Derrida, the idea of a metaphysics of presence was found to be lacking because of the gap. Then you had a metaphysics based on saying there are no metaphysics, but of course that gives you lots of trouble. And where we're at now is saying, no, no, no. A lot of the things that school taught us were wrong or not to pay attention to are actually the basis of metaphysics, ontology, and philosophy,
Actually,
like
the
the mixed
foundation. It's
metaphor.
actually more important.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's more important.
we've thrown out the baby and kept the bathwater.
Yeah. That's funny. Like what I like to say with Derrida, although I actually have quite a lot of respect for Derrida because he actually was deconstructing language to open us up to what language actually was, which is a continual flow. And I'd have to elaborate on that, but he does
Yeah, that
deconstruct. He
makes sense.
says all metaphysics of presence are done. And what that means is basically he sums it up by saying you can never cross from the word cat to the phenomenon of cat. There is always a gap between the signifier and the signified. Therefore, metaphysics is deconstructed. Well, what I would argue is that only deconstructs metaphysics of the gap, but actually metaphysics is based on the act of apprehension or attention or awareness. So for example, if I take the letters TAC and I start mixing them around, TCA, CAT, oh, cat, that is not deconstructed. The moment of apprehension is not deconstructed. Now, I can never, from the word cat, then get to the thing cat, but the mysterious moment of getting, the metaphysics of awareness are still with us
Yeah,
very much so.
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
made a huge mistake of thinking all
That,
metaphysics were metaphysics of gaps. But
that's that's where the change is the
yes,
metaphysics of awareness.
exactly. That's right.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
would, yeah, that's 100%. And I would argue that,
So that's what matters. That's where we need to aim.
yes, that's it. Not the gap, not crossing the gap, because the gap is actually the thing of space for ever expansion into mystery. We don't want to cross the gap Because the gap is actually the space for flatness to become geometry once it accepts the apprehension. And then there's always more to apprehend because apprehension is never final because the gap is not crossed. The mistake is thinking that the inability to cross the gap is a bad thing when actually it's the space of creative ever unfolding for all eternity, you can even say, in apprehension.
That brings me to something else. And again, I'm going to project my own shit onto this, but
Please.
there's something with the McGill-Christ, the two hemispheres that I don't know, the more conscious you are, the more aware you are that the two are speaking a different language.
Yep.
And that you yourself are an amalgam of two contradictory
Yes.
languages. And so then that itself then undermines that arrogant rational supremacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think the fool is the modern mass man who believes in the arbitrary separation of the pretense of the intellect.
Yep.
And then the wise man can transcend that apparent dichotomy and recognizes that it's not my perspective versus your perspective, and we're voting on the better perspective. It's that there's like another reality out there, and then like you're participating in a tiny piece of it, and I'm participating in a tiny piece of it. And what you're participating in and what I'm participating in is so minuscule to what actually meant that it's almost irrelevant.
Yep.
And so we're in this pretense of, no, I'm a separate egoic aware thing, and then you are a separate egoic aware thing, and we are in competition for who's right and wrong. And like there's just something about that that's just so detrimental.
100%. Well, again, this is where Hegel, he says contradiction is the beginning of thought, not an area that thought cannot go. Like for him, a contradiction is actually
yeah. And so that's that Overton window I was talking about. Is we're like, oh no, difference. That's we can't be a community and talk about difference.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's what a community is. It's the different perspectives unifying around a greater truth.
Yeah, exactly.
We're trying to say, no, we're all the same perspective, and there is no greater truth. Like to me, that's just evil. Like that's just that's foolish.
By definition, that's a form of pride. It's a communal pride. If we are the greater truth in our relation, then we have collapsed the vertical into the horizontal, and thus we have said we are God. Right? So, for Hegel, like for example, there's always been the ship of thesis, or all of these contradictions of parts and wholes. Hegel says, wait a minute. If we don't know when the whole begins from the parts, then the words part and whole must not mean what we think they are. This is the key. He thinks contradiction unveils that we're stuck in algebra, basically. But what we've done is said contradictions are the things we ignore. He wants us to focus them and reformat logic and everything based on the reality of contradiction, not to ignore them as exceptions to the rule. And if you do that, it blows up everything, and you then get a real focus on awareness and stuff like that. As we were saying,
I was talking about.
Yes, 100%, because a contradiction is a clearing. It's automatically a boom. Everything you think is actually not what you think, and so you have to let the concept diverge. Things have to shine themselves.
Sorry to throw these metaphors out there again, but there's the static structure that if you are aimed just at the static structure, you become kind of satanic.
Yes.
But then there's a creative, ingenious genie that's generous, that's like Jesus, that's like the son that grows up in that paradigm.
Yes.
And then sees through into a different paradigm.
Yes.
And there's something about that ability to go outside the paradigm that appears as a serpent in the garden and appears as this Lucifer of disrupting the static. But in some sort of way, the only way to adapt is to treat difference as beneficial and to integrate that difference into. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going, but there's. I think the Bible is just a metaphor for this process, this coming to consciousness process, the recognition of difference, the conscious awareness of the separation of the. And so I think we our culture is that static structure.
Yes.
And now this new space is trying to refine the culture, and so we're trying to re-embody that Christ spirit that revivifies a tyranny. We've kind of come into a oversimplified, unidimensional, rationalistic, tyrannical paradigm that is then despirited or desouled. And so
Hmm.
now we're trying to reinsole the paradigms that unite our psyche or something like
Yep.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
in the situation you just described is the only way that things are new. That's and when God says, "I'm making all things new," write these words down. They are trustworthy and true. Like this notion of making things are only new in the integration of difference, right? But we think that difference is a threat to the next
It's
thing,
a
right? If
threat.
we,
Right,
yeah,
right. And so
when
it's that
actually,
that that skepticism that difference is threatening rather than the faith that difference is enlightening.
yes,
Is
yes.
is is that a characteristic disposition? Is that a personality trait? Is that an enculturated
Hmm.
sage or nage or
Yeah.
little like
Hmm.
voice in the back of your head? Is that like what? Yeah, what is that? How is that? And I think that's where we need to be aiming is something in those
Yeah.
dimensions or those realms or that area of the ether of matter that isn't matter.
1000%. That's basically what it comes down to if we're very general. So the first thing is the question of in history, has there been a transformation? You can basically say of what people want, because there is a sense it's not simplistic like a kind of simplistic one, but do people want higher geometry or are they driven by it? Like the want
So,
has to become
so
habituated, right?
I think we're tempted towards decadence. I think we're tempted towards flattening.
Yes, we are 100%.
So that's why
So,
it's so rare that people are aiming
yep.
towards transcendence. And that's
Yep,
why,
absolutely. Hmm.
yeah,
So you have, like in psychoanalysis, the question of how does desire become drive, which ultimately is what is being suggested, because drive is being it's no longer a object you want, but a horizon of being, you can even say, like a mode. Drive is a
that would
mode,
be
desire is an object, right? And
right.
basically, a lot of Lacan is an interest. It almost sounds like C.S. Lewis in The Weight of Glory. It's the idea that no objects satisfy us. So we ultimately create various mental gymnastics to continue to convince ourselves that some object
Yeah.
will, and it's all, yeah, that's right, that's right. And
So,
eventually, what we do is, I think,
yeah.
identify with the big other, he'll put it, and these are
Right.
all just different ways
Yeah.
of putting this. So, how does one move from desire to drive, which you could also
Yeah. That's the
associate
spiritual transformation.
yeah,
Yeah.
a spiritual trend, you could also associate it with the movement to the Nietzschean child, which entails the lion and the camel, which also is tying to some sort of spirit child, absolute knower. There are different languages for this transformation, and the million-dollar question is how does the transformation occur? And it has to fundamentally be tied to the question of how does desire become drive? Like how do people get driven in a different way? Well, this is where history and
'Cause-
economics and so please.
Sorry, I feel like we are initially driven, but then we've confused drives with desires,
Yes.
and now we're infected by desire.
Yes.
And so then you're trying to say, how do we turn our desires into drives? I think it's almost like, how do we forget that desires are the most important thing in the world? And how do
Sure.
we remember to be
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
driven internally? Or
Yeah.
something.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because there's always a weird mechanism following human Hegel where the thing we need to do is a return, but the return is different. Like where you
It's
start when
totally
you,
different.
it's the
Yeah.
return is different, and the thing
Yeah.
you return to is changed by the fact you return to it.
Also different.
Yeah. So the return is an re in parentheses, right? Like in Hume, you start off in common life. But if you never go on the philosophical journey, then common life becomes banality of evil. You have to go on the
Mm.
philosophical journey, which then tempts you to think you're better than the common life and then return to it and serve the common life. So you have to have a
Right.
return that changes your relationship to the common life.
But but won't don't you okay, so then there's something in that going off to the mountain and transcending where then you return with something of value that inherently implies you are then of more value or you have a higher source of information. And so then how do you not identify with the identity of that which you're trying to communicate? Like
Yeah.
how do you how do you model an identity
Yep.
that
Yep.
you're then
Yep.
not
Yep. Yep.
pathologically identified with? And so
100%.
it is that here is beauty that I have created, and I am good, and I am showing you how to be beautiful. But also, I'm not a narcissist who's just self-aggrandizing, I swear.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm being a compassionate leader by showing off how cool I am. or something like that. Like because again, we were talking about how do we model this behavior.
Yep, yep,
But
yep,
then if the audience is bitter and resentful,
yep.
well, then the audience is going to see a good faith actor and they're going to interpret a bad
Yes,
faith narcissist.
yes,
And
yes.
so then they are going to crucify Christ because Christ is
Yep,
acting like he's better than they are.
yep, yep.
But
And
if
that,
Christ didn't act like he was better than they are, then he would be lying to himself.
yep,
And
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
how does Christ actually be better than people without pissing people off because he's better? Like without how do you inspire and not embitter? Or how do you be likably good and not that pisses me off because he's better than me? Or something like
Oh,
that.
it's $1 million question. The mountain you come back to, when you come back, you must come, the way that you are better must come across to people as possibly evidence that you are worse, or that you are actually, because the transformation is always a negation. The transformation is always a certain negation of the AA. It's going to feel like a negation because if you have an enclosed system, it feels together. So what saves you from enclosure, is always actually going to
Yeah,
feel like a breaking, right?
definitely. Yeah.
So a person
And
that
so how do
comes,
you get people to think that breaking is good, not breaking is bad? Not,
well,
oh, I'm broken and so I must be on the wrong path. It's like, no, no, no. If you're always right, you're definitely on the wrong path.
yeah,
Like there's
yeah,
something about, yeah, sorry,
yeah.
there's something
Well,
there.
there's
Yeah.
a weird thing, and again, this is where the details I think are very interesting, where to most people, or to a lot of people, Jesus is the magician giving them what they want, or he's a heretic. Like when he's forgiven sins, like in the
Because he
Pharisees,
speaks out against the paradigm. And so
yeah,
that, how do you just, because it requires on the audience to be able to discern between heresy and prophecy,
yeah,
because
yeah,
both of them are outside of the normal paradigm. And
yes,
so there has to be some sort of faithful presence with that which is outside of the paradigm,
yes,
and then some sort of mature either acceptance or rejectance of that which is outside the paradigm based on how that information resonates with some sort of through line of goodness
yes.
that we have then intuited or something. We've
Well,
built a relationship with a supposition of goodness that
yes,
then is like a moral compass that then is like our quality control.
yes,
And then we're using our moral compass as quality control for our ideas, not our ideas as quality control for our other ideas.
100%.
Something like that.
Yes, absolutely. And then you see, what I would say, there has to, though, be the risk of the person from the quote unquote mountain being misunderstood, or it would be rational for the person to come back and there wouldn't be any
Or then it
courage of
wouldn't
them,
be,
right?
yeah, then it wouldn't be faithful. Then
It
it
wouldn't
wouldn't
be
be
fair.
faithful and encouraging. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there has to be the possibility of misunderstanding, or else it would just be a program.
Then it
Um,
wouldn't matter.
and then it
Yeah.
wouldn't matter. Exactly. So there has to be that possibility. The question becomes with Jesus is how are there 12, right? Like how are there crowds that will listen? You must basically expect that when stuff hits the fan, the majority may not be there. But is there enough seeds planted in people that
Right.
something can grow on the other side, right? And there's
Are there enough
there's
seeds? Are there enough seeds planted in people, and are there enough nutrients in the soil
yes,
to realize those seeds?
yes, yes, that's
And
correct.
is there enough sunlight? And like, yeah, sorry.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
And
go on.
so basically there's a dynamic here of going to the mountain, then coming back and necessarily looking like a fool. That must be the case. And that also there must be the risk of being misunderstood, because if not, it wouldn't be a matter of faith. As that dynamic is accepted as necessary, there is the question, okay, but even though that risk is necessary, is there a way to increase the probability that that risk is not realized and actually we have a more effective spreading mechanism versus starting with 12 and going from there, right? Is there a way to increase the probability that instead of 12, maybe we'll have 30 or 40, right? And this is a design question, and I think there are ways, actually. So, for example, you mentioned the school system. Neil Postman said basically school is where you learn to get good at trivia. An educated person is good at trivia. The teacher asks a
Yeah.
random question, who can answer it first? And you're not actually rewarded as smart if you can think through a problem that nobody knows the answer to, right?
Right.
So for example, if the
It's
education,
irrelevant. That doesn't matter. Creativity doesn't matter.
that's right.
Ingenious expression doesn't matter.
So
No one
exactly.
cares about it.
Yeah. So for example, if you changed the paradigm of school from trivia to oral conversation examination, and you actually made it about solving problems no one knew the answer to, that right there would increase it at least have people on average more open to a mode of being that is not knowing definitely its end. They would actually be more used to in their educational training of an encounter of a way of thinking that is not easily quantifiable because you remove the paradigm of trivia is good for education. Second, because also if a lot of this is about architecture, what I would argue is in terms of the society, you want to think in terms of changing laws more than running institutions, right? Like, so for example, a law or a certification principle is basically the colleges basically have a monopoly on certification for high-paying jobs. Like you have to go to college to get it, right? Well, wherever there's monopoly, there's inefficiency, right? So you break up the college monopoly on certification. So you have employment testing is extremely risky, for example, right? It's legally risky. Colleges also certification, regulation.
Okay.
That's right. Regulation and also certification basically lead to the disablement Ivan Illich talks about because you're not allowed to do anything unless you get a professional class, right? So there are legal things that could be reformed that don't seem like they'd make a big deal, but actually if you shifted it, it would profoundly increase the probability that the average person is actually open to a mode of thinking that is not definite in its end. Because also,
that's the key is how do we encourage people to be open to modes of thinking that aren't definite in their end?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
How do you encourage people to have the faithful presence to be patient and aware and participate in something that is ongoing and developing?
Yes.
Because that's actually real life.
Yes.
We've grown up in a fake life of static, determined, here's everything, and here's a bunch of trivia.
Yes, that's exactly right.
We actually enculturated people to believe in an illusion. And now we need to remind people how to deal with reality. And reality is fundamentally chaotic and unknown.
Yes.
And maybe not fundamentally chaotic, but it's fundamentally unknown. It's fundamentally indeterminate. And so
that's correct.
Your awareness, your psychological awareness has to be on the dimension of reality that is not yet manifest.
Yes.
If your center of conscious awareness is only considering things on the plane of reality of what is already known and delineated and determined, then you've already lost.
Yes, 100%.
Something like that. Like if that's the only plane of your awareness, then you're fucked. Like if that is one plane of awareness and that is in proper context, then it's infinitely usable and it gives us all the technologies we need, and I love it and it's great. But if that's your only mode of thinking, well, then you're addicted to a reciprocally narrowing thing that's going to become self-deceptive and self-destructive.
100%.
And
that's 100%. I mean, it's basically kind of a law of entropy. Everything has to go like shrink on itself and like die. And so if you're not able to restore dimensionality and it flattens, then it's going to eventually crush on itself, basically. Hell's locked on the inside.
That's where I feel like our culture is. We're just flat.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
So how do we revivify that? How do we blow that back up? How do we reinvigorate that?
100%. So I think there are those legal things that we just said. I mean, some other things, you replace the resume with the portfolio because basically resumes encourage flatness, portfolios, like the artist, like you have to create something and you have to show something. I think YouTube can honestly be a kind of portfolio because people can see what you do, right? So, you have the portfolio replaces the resume. The other key, now, this is a large claim that I would have to put meat on the bones. You have to create a mechanism of the possibility of investing in people, not just companies. You need a new investment mechanism that would be Anthony Morley will talk about intrinsic research code. We've talked a bit. Like we have to be able to, as individuals, invest in one another that has the possibility of non-zero sumness versus zero sumness. Now, this is a very elaborate topic, but economically, our possibilities of investment are very, very restricted that are going to feed quantification.
Yeah, I want to see if we can play with the word investment because I feel like that's one of those triggering words.
Yes.
Where it almost carries the implication of a financial or a capitalistic undertone.
Yes.
And so I want to see if we can encourage that to, I don't know, Peterson always says sacrifice. And
yeah.
Like, I don't want to say sacrifice and I don't want to say investment, but something along the meta undertone there. Yep. Yeah. I don't know why I pedantically wanted to clarify something there, but I did want to bring that up.
Well, there's emotional investment. I mean, there's spiritual investment. And
maybe I'm just biased to the word investment. Because
the key to the word investment also is tied to risk. Like we have to be able to take risk with one another in a manner that opens economic and social doors, right? And honestly, that's not really afforded now. Basically, the only way basically we exist, this would be a large claim. The economy has moved In my opinion, capitalism today, as of 2025, has moved from a certainly a saving-based model. You will not get ahead unless you take risk. You have to take risk in the stock market, equity, whatever, right? The
Okay.
problem, because the cost of living and all of these things have basically pushed the system in a risk direction. But we can only take risk in institutions and corporations, right? So there's a centralization of the money flow for
Okay. I see.
survival
Yeah.
toward
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
quantification mindset. We have to
So
be
then
able to,
there's an intermediary of that potentially disperses appropriate attention.
exactly, 100%. So we have to
And
gain the,
that's I think the danger of society is to put more and more intermediaries in to increase the efficiency.
yes,
But then in using more and more intermediaries and increasing the efficiency, we actually just dilute the attention, and then that
yes.
might actually not be increasing the efficiency. And
Yeah,
so
it's treating symptoms.
there's a sacrifice being
Yeah.
made, and we're
Mhm.
like, oh well, we'll sacrifice this non-entity of spirit for all this material
Yes,
gain, and so we'll sacrifice nothing and we'll gain it all.
yes, yes.
And it's like we're not seeing that embodied connective cost or whatever. Something
100%.
I don't
No,
know,
that's
something.
100% it. Because what ends up happening with that, like it's treating symptoms. You're never actually treating the cause.
Right,
And
right.
so,
That's what I was trying to talk about. The actuality deals with the symptoms,
yes,
whereas dealing in the potential and dealing in the future, then that's more causally connected.
yes,
And so if you want to do actions that matter, you want actions that matter that affect causes,
yes.
not treatments that cover up and mask effects or something like that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
100%. And so that has to be done, but there has to be a way to change the money flow. And this gets into basically a way to invest directly, to put risk directly in value versus in commodity form. Now, this is extremely elaborate, and but that's also a key piece of all of this. But two, also what you are saying, not to jump, it's very interesting. Like Plato's Republic in Book 7, after the allegory of the cave, basically the Republic is a pedagogy. It's like, what do you need to teach to actually increase the probability that people are quote unquote philosophical? You know what one of the things are in there that I always think is really great? Choir. Choir is actually a great way to train harmony because what does choir
Because
do?
you have to be present and you
You have
have
to
to be
be,
reacting
yeah,
and you have to, yeah,
that's
that makes
right.
sense.
Like when
Mhm.
you look, what's so wild with Plato is that you don't,
That's your jazz and your improv and your
yeah,
play and your dialogue is you
that's
have to
exactly
be
right. It's
responsive.
choir.
It
What's
gets you in
wild,
community. It gets you in receptivity to communal.
like the second half
And
of
then you're
books,
attempting to coordinate with
yes,
community.
that's right. That's
Interesting.
right.
Interesting.
And
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
second half of book 7 of the Republic is very important for this discussion because, for one, he says, don't you dare introduce books and stuff like that to kids before they're teenagers or they'll hate it. You need to start them
Yeah,
off
that's
with,
what I think we did in our schools.
yeah, oh, yes,
We introduced complex literature and intellectualized it way too young, and I just
yeah,
like hated literature class.
yeah, yeah, because for Plato,
Really?
you're supposed to start with play, gymnastics, music.
Yeah, we've totally lost play.
Yeah.
We've totally abandoned play. And so
And
that's this dialogue of playful interaction of
yes,
presence and community and vibrating back and
yes,
forth and sharing time and energy and you talk and I talk and
because
you
once
say
you
something and that reminds me of something and then I
yes,
say something and that reminds you of something and what I say then matters and then oh shit, what I say matters. I should pay attention to what I'm saying.
100%.
And then I care more about what I'm thinking and what I'm saying and what all the implications for that are. And then I think at the end of that I make a better person.
100%. So basically, Plato is like, you must start with the habits of play, we'll say, before you introduce quantification, or the quantification will eat them. It will destroy them.
Okay, so now I find the audience only listens to the quantification, and
Mhm.
if the play is necessary for the quantification, and so a true convincing of a skeptical audience would require them to participate. But if they're truly a skeptical audience, they'll only participate in something that they have previously determined is of their idea. And so,
Yes.
how do you get a participatory thing through the quality
Mhm.
control
Mhm.
captcha
Mhm.
of the person who's judging, who's limiting their beliefs, who's going to reject anything that's living and embodied? And sorry, does that make any sense?
100%. And also,
Okay.
please note, I don't think it's by chance that these kind of conversations have a certain, Viveki has mentioned it, a certain music to it, right? A certain kind of musicality is taught it. Even Seth will say the
Mhm.
musicality of being. We're entering dialogos, and I think the full form of what conversation is supposed to be borders on a musicality. And that's really important because you're learning the opposite of small talk is a certain music talk. It's more of,
Mm,
because it's a
mm,
mistake to associate the opposite of small talk with talking about big ideas, because you can talk about big ideas and be dead. The opposite of small
yeah.
talk is music. It's a musical speaking, and that
Interesting.
teaches a certain openness and so on and so forth. So a few things. The areas basically that teach this I'll say, childhood, quite, what the music, we could say, this openness that is being described, are going to be things like music, art, architecture, gymnastics, choir, mediums, models, communal relationships. Okay. It's going to be those kind of things, right? So, first off, if you want to start a church, you need to make your church do those things. Okay. That should be
Right. Yeah,
step
yeah, yeah.
one.
So
So,
definitely,
church,
definitely.
community,
Yeah,
your
yeah.
family should be doing those things right now. Right now.
True.
And you see,
True.
also, too, so that would be one. So second is, how do you get more people to do it? Well, one, if you don't have conversations talking about it, then people can't know they need to do it. So that's not going to happen. Three, if they don't have models to see people doing it, they're not going to believe it. And then
Mm,
four,
mm,
if they don't have the spaces to enter in which it is encouraged, they're not going to do it. Well, right now, the social coordination mechanism is doing these things. It is offering spaces for people to do that, which again, here's the thing. If entering these spaces online gives you the confidence and training to believe in the reality of this openness, that can give you the confidence to bring it to your church or to bring it to your community and to face people who don't accept it. Because there's two questions to this. How do you get people open to this who aren't open to it? But also, how do you increase the confidence of people who are open to it to bring it to people who aren't and to
to
take the
actually
slings
live
and arrow?
to
Because
take it out of the propositional
yes,
realm of oh I agree to that
yes,
to the embodied realm
yes,
of I live that.
yes, and
Those are
to
two
keep
very
doing
different
it,
things.
and to keep
Yeah.
doing it as it is rejected, and to keep doing it as it doesn't entirely land, because
Okay,
that
so that, yeah, yeah, that's another thing that gets me because I've been trying to help people and they're trying to make changes. And then if they don't see the change effective immediately, then they don't believe it. So
correct.
how do you give that faithful presence to somebody to encourage them to do something unfamiliar so that they can do it imperfectly and fail, but yet by them doing it wrong, that's actually good?
Mm-hmm.
I've found that to be a very difficult thing to encourage people. Like
Yep,
if you're coaching somebody in a sport, like, hey,
yep.
try this new technique. And then they try the new technique and it doesn't work. And they're like, oh, well, I don't like this new technique because I was better before I tried the technique. And then now it's wrong. And so I think having a living, embodied conversation is going to cause people to be clumsy. And then people are going to get insecure that they're clumsy and they're going to say, oh, this isn't fun. I don't like this.
Yep. 100%. Well, number one, you have to be a model of it. You have to keep doing it yourself and show it. And the critical thing, and I do think Jesus shows this, you basically, for anyone who you are going to step in on potentially helping move into this place, you must be a friend with them. And you yourself must be the one that they can experiment with and mess up with and be there for them. You have to, and that by definition is going to be small then. There are only
Okay, so if
so many
you,
people.
yeah, if you have no friends, how do you model friendship to other people to be friends?
Well, that's a
Just,
good question.
from the general status of the society being
Yeah,
connected and not
yeah.
know having to relate things, how does the society then partake in these relations that are alien to them or something like that?
Very true. It's going to start with the people that have friends, and it's just the law of large numbers that there's going to be some percentage of people who are on this wavelength who are getting it because of just Providence will have some amount of people by some circumstance. Maybe it's 12 on planet Earth, but there will be some amount
Okay,
of
okay.
people, and those people are whom it starts with. And if they can model it and show confidence of it, well, then you can start having other people do it, bring it to different areas, and you start moving in an exponential curve. But again, an exponential curve always requires faith by definition,
Right.
because
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
But
for the
if faith is the missing ingredient, yeah, so that's where my rationality has left hemispherically assumed that our culture is just so bereft of fertilization that no matter how many seeds I throw out there, there's just no fucking trees are
sure,
going to grow. There's no new fruits coming out of that
sure,
because there's just not enough time for it to mature. There's not enough soil. There's not enough ingredients. yeah. I keep skeptically thinking myself out and then being like, hey, well, that's I'm going to be skeptical of that. So sorry that I keep doing the same thing,
No, but this is
and I
where
think these are the issues we're wrestling with. You know
I
what I
think
mean?
so. And I don't think it's by chance that in Jesus you have a model of faith that then is also demanding a certain self-sacrifice without guarantee. Like there is no it could be the case that no seeds grow. It could be the case that nothing grows. If it couldn't be the case, there could be no courage and faith part of it, therefore it'd be meaningless. It has to have the possibility that it does nothing if it's to mean anything in its doing. And so there's a strong combination between the faithful presence and the possibility of doing it for nothing. Only the people, but basically what this means is only those of whom are willing to have the courage of having faith in something without guarantee meet the condition of possibly designing the circumstances of an exponential curve. There is no
So
other
okay,
format of that possibility.
right. So if we're trying to do a tipping point of a spiritual transformation of the curve, well, then that sort of requires the agents of transformation to have agency or something like that.
This is where so we're modeling here some sort of idea because even the Bible says where seed dies, Dostoevsky, where it dies, many blooms, and there are many people who die without, but then it has an impact on things. So critically, though, when we're saying there has to be some sort of willingness to ultimately work hard at something that you never see the results of, this does not mean you can't be strategic. And strategic is the faithful presence where, yes, you're faithfully present, but you're also going to Ark and having the estuaries in the place, right? You're also interacting with people of influences because there is a little secret. So I actually think a lot of people, some percentage of people who are culturally, socially, economically very powerful actually are more open to this stuff than it seems because they've reached the saturation point. They've reached the emptiness of it. And there is some percentage, maybe only 8%, but there are 8% people who are powerful, who care that if people doing the faithful presence are transparent and open and possibly being seen, then those 8 can find you. Because here's the trick. If the faithful presence goes to the elite, they will be compromised by the elite. But if the elite come to the faithful presence, well, then the faithful presence doesn't get taken by the demonic logic, right? So there's always this idea too, where if you maintain the faithful presence and you do it in a manner that is in relation with institutions, that are even in institutions, but not according to the logic of institutions, then the probability that this structure works is higher, but it's still not guaranteed. So you can have strategies. I think it is a strategically wise thing to try to take down the college monopoly on credentials, to remove trivia education. That is strategically wise, but it still doesn't guarantee anything, right? So this is where the possibility of martyrdom does not mean you're, how do I put this? The possibility of martyrdom should not lead to a certain rationalization of carelessness, because that can occur. The Christians should say, well, we're supposed to be martyrs, so let's not even think about the economy. Let's not even think about
Yeah,
institutions.
and
I don't
that's where
think,
I think we are. I think most people just don't care, and so
yeah,
we're trying to create a spiritual revolution to remind people to care. And I'm just not sure there's enough seeds in there to care. And so then I guess the response to that is you care enough internally that you're internally motivated that you create a product or by your artistic expression, then there's something physically created that then models that encouragement to somebody else.
yes,
And then they see your resilience and your modeling and your structure, and then that encourages them to believe in their own internal drive or something
yes,
like that.
yes,
And so then it's still an external drive, but it's an external signal that then encourages an internal fire that then the internal fire is what propels it.
exactly,
Not some sort of top-down external, hey,
exactly,
look at me and do what I'm doing and follow me because I'm better than you.
exactly.
Or something like that.
100%.
Is that fair?
That's 100%. Hegel talks about shine. So basically, you could say this is the age where we need shine, not pamphlet. Pamphlet is information. I give you the pamphlet and you read. It's like evangelicism, right? Like what we need is an age of shine. And what shine is, if here's the circle and here's the flat, and we were speaking with Seth and Aspasia about that. There's always the danger that the flat drags down the circle to flatness, right? Because of energy, because you're trying hard and you're pulled down, right? So how does the circle stay the circle and this become a circle? Well, it has to be through inspiration. They see the circle and
Right.
it pulls them up,
Yeah.
right? So they
Yeah,
are
yeah.
inspired, right? Well, this is shine. This is beauty. Beauty shines. You see, beauty is evangelical because it attracts, right? Like this is the key.
So,
Shine has a certain pull to it but it is an internal pull that then makes you go upward. Now, the danger though with this is you have to be aware of things in therapy like transference, where the person actually, instead of themselves becoming higher dimensionality, they're attracted to you and they never grow, and that's a bad guru. That's the guru problem, right? So what you have to do is position yourself in a manner where you're not a guru, but you inspire people on their own to become their own higher dimensionalities, right? Well, that's a matter of shine, and that is a matter of the structure of how you interact. And here's actually why I think this technology is critical here. When I'm talking to you, I have no idea who's watching. You know, if you posted these conversations online, I have no idea who's watching. I have no idea who could see it, right? So there can't be the guru structure, because this could just be a giant waste of time. And who's gonna, who watches TLC conversations except weirdos, right? So all it can do is be put out there that may have an inspiration on people, but my ego cannot so readily be wrapped up into it because I have no idea who I'm talking to. Oh, critically, the audience is secondary to you. I'm focused on you and this relationship. And so this technology allows something very unique. It allows public conversation that doesn't have to occur in public, where you can literally forget the public, and maybe the public never even sees it, and yet you nevertheless can have a dynamic emerge between two people where people can see shine, modeling, and ideas. And then secondarily and indirectly, other people can benefit from them. And that actually increases the probability that you get this, where they themselves are inspired, versus a bad guru dynamic, or where it flattens you.
yeah.
So you now have a possibility of indirect modeling. And please note, this is also one of the things, the lack of indirect modeling has killed the church, because you have a preacher at the front that then becomes the model. And when the preacher fails, or they're giving you all the ideas, people get discouraged, and the preacher has to somehow match all 200 people there. And you get a neurotic structure, as Lacan would say it, that's unsustainable and ultimately tends to lead to bad guru structures. Well, now you have a possibility of indirect church, basically. And also you have a possibility of public oration that's dialogue-based, not speech-based, basically, like giving a speech. And so the conversation is more likely to not be an egoic resuscitation of an internal symmetry, because the other people there can complexify it and challenge it, and it all can come forth with a harmonious shine. So this technology as well affords a higher probability of this than this or this, which is the bad guru. And that is really important. And then if that occurs, and people are so internally developed, if they then meet in real life, or they go into their real life communities, the probability that they have the internal fortitude to maintain that complexity and to be confident in it is higher, because they've bought into it. They have an internal drive, so they're more anti-fragile.
Yeah. Increasing that internal fortitude's got to be the goal.
Yes.
This might be a little random, but something you were saying earlier about the shine, and there's something in that that's like the golden glimmer, and something in that's like Mercury or Hermes or something like that. I don't know if you've read Harry Potter, but the golden snitch that Flint's about. There's something in that transcendent value that's different from the normal game of the balls in the holes, and there's something about that glimmer of difference that, like you were saying, is naturally attractive. And if people see that glimmer of gold, they will want to do it. They will want to be informed by that. They will want to buy into that.
Yep.
And now that's a beautiful ideal. And I really like that. And I feel inspired by it. But then there's also part of me, again, that keeps rearing its ugly head, the cynical part of me that is used to troll culture, and a bunch of millennials who are cynically sitting behind their computer screens and undercutting everything. And obviously I'm hyperbolizing this thing, but there's something where I have so much real world experience with normal people seeing a glimmer of shine and seeing that as like a crab in the bucket pulling them back down. Or like the highest flower in the Japanese thing where they clip the highest flower, or you don't have a garden because you're always plucking your flowers and putting them in your windowsill, or whatever the thing that may be. I heard you talk about like, yeah, if you're good and you're beautiful, then people will love you. And like, I want to agree with that. But then like I think about it and I'm like, well, that's just not how the world works. That's just what idyllic philosophers in their ivory towers think.
Sure,
But then
sure,
also I'm like, no, that's the fucking truth. Like we need people to think like that. But then I'm like, well, yeah, nobody I've ever worked with has ever thought about that. Like none of the
sure.
people on my team think
Hmm.
about that. Like my
Hmm.
neighbors don't. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so then there's this like half of me thinks that's so realistic and so beautiful and so inspiring, and the other half of me is like, oh, that's just another excuse for somebody to cut you off at the knees. And so there's that weird, again, I
hmm.
know I'm being unfair here,
No,
but
no,
I think
no,
that's
no.
the wrestling. That's the process. That's the battle that you go through when
Yeah,
you're in these positions. So yeah,
100%.
I don't know.
No,
That
no,
occurred to me.
the shine is not guaranteed because if it was guaranteed, then again, it would be meaningless. It would not require courage. And the shine requires courage to be a shine. Otherwise, it's a program, it's just information. And so it can
And so
always
it's like,
be,
yeah, how is that difference? Is that difference curious and interesting to where you want to integrate that? Or is that difference a threat and a challenge and you want to eliminate it?
yep,
And I
yeah, yeah.
think it's that spiritual disposition towards the other, to just put it succinctly, I think there's something there, maybe not literally, but there's something metaphorically there
Yes.
that's, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I mean, Jesus has the greatest shine of all, you could say, and they killed him and he lost everyone, right? So, just shine does not
Right.
guarantee that people live. But what's remarkable is that even in death, there's still shine, right? Even to this day, right? And a lot of people, like martyrs and all these different things. There's a few things. Basically, if this cynicism was not to some degree realistic, then the people doing the work themselves would not be growing from the work. And so it would be entirely a project of saving the world because we would be we would be good to go, right? The moment there is a group of people that are going to save the world, you're done. That's idolatry, right? So the doing of this work that creates sign, the shine has to be secondary to the work of the individual doing it who believe they need it and believe that the drive is important and who believe in it even though they cannot quantify it, which means it's a basis of faith.
Mm.
And then secondarily is the shine that has no guarantee.
That's
And
a
the
character, man.
yes,
Yeah.
and the moment you say we're doing this to shine, the shine is gone. You always have to have, I
Right.
like what Timothy
Because then
Keller
that misses the
says.
point.
Yeah, Timothy
That
Keller,
puts the aim, that puts the perspective in the wrong perspective.
yes,
That puts your head in the wrong perspective. Yeah, yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Timothy Keller talks about self-forgetfulness, and I really do like that. You have selfish, selfless. He says both of those are problematic. You need to do something in a manner where you forget yourself. You're just not even thinking about yourself. You're just using yourself, like your thumb. You don't talk about how great your thumb is, nor do you talk about how terrible it is. You just use it, right? So likewise,
So
you
that would be
need,
like getting in flow, right? Like
yes,
Csikszentmihalyi,
that's exactly it. And so
because that
basically,
gets you out of the headspace. Yeah.
that's correct. And so there's something with virtue and self forgetfulness that is tied, where the ability to have true
Perfect.
vitality and virtue and habit and all of that allow you to maintain a flow where you're not thinking about shine, you're not thinking about it, you're in self forgetfulness. You're
Okay.
simply in the orbit
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
right? And that's what you have to aim at because that is beyond you. I mean, you forget yourself in it. And then from that is the possibility of shine that maybe no one sees and is attracted to, but maybe some people are. But regardless, you still do it because you believe it's a good in of itself, basically, because it's a testament to the beautiful of God. It's a testament to the beautiful. It is the thing that is fitting for the human to do. And so you do
And
it
so
even if it doesn't spread.
that's where I'm concerned about the culture. Like whether you talk about the King's North and the demonization of culture, whether you talk about the shadow side, or whether you talk about, I don't know, I can't remember Jung's exact thing where he talks about 1,000 years of upward trajectory and 1,000 years of downward trajectory. It seems like we're in this enantiodramy of the downward trend of the rational tyranny. And so, yeah, when we talk about these things of being inspirational, the futuristic spiritual side of me is like, raw, yeah, this is great. I'm inspired. I totally believe all this. And then like the socialized, like intellectual critic is like, what are these guys talking about?
Sure,
These guys are ridiculous.
sure.
And so I think, yeah, even I am personally struggling to hear the ideas that I actually believe in. And so
Yeah.
I think
Mm-hmm.
for other people to hear these ideas and to believe in them and to actually trust them and make meaningful change in their
Yeah.
life, I think I think we're still a long way from that or something. Or I think we're aiming away from that or something like that. And so that's why I'm trying to shift the momentum or something. I don't know if that makes any sense,
No,
but
it makes sense. I mean, I guess I'm encouraged by the number of people I see online who are doing these kind of conversations, who are willing to say read hard books, who are meeting in person and trying to create different sort of communal structures. It's certainly not the majority, but I'm amazed that it's 1,000. I'm amazed that it's 3,000. I'm amazed that it's thousands. It's seemingly thousands of people are willing to do this. And that is encouraging. And again, from a historical mindset, I guess just reading history, different examples of history, what you see, in my opinion, is basically people doing things like this that change the social imagination. Like, there is no way to not have this be the case of it may not work and who's going to listen to it anyway. That very tension is of itself evidence that rationality didn't do it. See, that's the key. The thing that
really, yeah,
the thing that unveils rationality as a problem itself has to give you results that can't possibly be a product of autonomous rationality. And so the very fact that it seems impossible or it seems like it will never work has to be the situation if it is to be plausibly not rationality that generated the next epoch, if you will, which of course would just fall back into the self-reference of the previous epoch, right? So there has to be the case. Cynicism has to have a good point, because if cynicism didn't have a good point, then it would be rationality that led the way. Cynicism actually unintentionally makes space for imagination to validate itself. Cynicism creates the clearing in which imagination can show that it actually matters and it actually works, as can belief and faith. Because if all of this is only possible if people basically have faith and courage in it, then cynicism unintentionally sets itself up for leading to the emotion, the imagination, and the courage that undermine cynicism by having a good point. Cynicism has a good point. And so that is actually, it's like the cross as a lure, right? It's like that idea in classic theology that Satan, the cross was a lure, and it was tricked onto the cross, and that was the downfall, right? Cynicism's very good point is precisely what sets it up to show that it can never actually replace or get rid of the human spirit. Cynicism can never destroy the potential for geometry. It can never remove the potential for imagination, but it can murky the waters to where we can't clearly see the role of imagination, and in that uncertainty, come to just follow autonomous rationality as all there is. And so if that murkiness is to go away, cynicism actually plays a useful role in actually having good points, because it rationally probably won't work. And so if it does, then rationality is not everything. And there's space for courage and imagination and things like that.
So I think with your excellent discernment, you are able to see cynicism and understand cynicism and the shortcomings of cynicism and the impulse to transcend cynicism. But you are also something that came up earlier is you were talking about how there's thousands of people on the internet that are doing these things, and I think that you come from a more established YouTube presence and networking, and so your exposure to other people might be more believable than what I think the average Joe coming to the corner for the first time is, because you actually have a persona in this, and so to you, you see those thousands, and that's more real to you. And so, yeah, that excellent ability to see through cynicism in general as a concept, and then also the social connectivity that you have that gives you evidence that there are thousands of people having these conversations, exponentially then privileges you into having faith, or to being able to have that faith or something like that. And so I guess in that sense, if you are more of the Zarathustra coming down from the place of wisdom and connection, how would you then help draw a line that people can follow that connects the dots if you are not wise and you are not aware of the real presence of good faith people? If you're out there and you're in a dead end job and all of your friends are bad actors, and What are you talking about, dude? I don't know. Cynicism just gives me a reason to tear down the patriarchy. And now I'm happy because I'm tearing something down. And so
Yeah,
I'm happy with my little role of cynic. And like cynicism is the
yeah,
end goal.
yeah, yeah.
And there's something in that. Yeah, I don't know why I keep resisting you because I'm agreeing with you,
No,
but also I feel like the society isn't going to hear the message. And so I'm like preemptively acting instead of society by objecting to something I agree with. And I don't
no,
know if that's insanity or if that's helpful, but
no.
here we are.
That's very important. Well, there's a few things. I mean, one, the forcing functions like the cross or the fires or the flood, one of the things that they do is actually, yes, if someone is enclosed in their cynicism or their self-rightness, these
Yeah.
horrible problems actually turn out to be a cleansing, right? Which sounds terrible, but it's not
So how
like,
do you terrify others into a horrifying cleansing while loving and encouraging them and supporting them?
yeah, no, it's an excellent question. Well, first off, there's this interesting problem in Jesus where he's here for the sick, right? Like only people who see themselves as
Yeah,
sick is he
yeah.
actually there for. You have to see yourself as needing
The
it. So there's
lost
a
and the
question.
sick. Yeah.
So basically, for me personally, there's nothing I can do for people
That's
who
it.
don't think they're sick. Like if they're
Yeah.
people who think their lives are great, great. I hope they are. Like, I hope they
Mhm.
are, because also you must
Yeah.
realize
Yeah.
if you take
Yeah.
everything we're saying as self enclosure seriously, if someone is self enclosed, that literally means there is nothing you can do. If they are
Yeah.
enclosed, there's
Yeah.
nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, because they're ignorant of you. They're not listening to you.
yeah, but
Yeah.
you're not. What I really think is important is one of the reasons Christianity and the church destroyed itself is because it figured out mechanisms to reach people who were self enclosed. There's only one way to do that is to go
Uh,
into
uh,
their enclosure, and you're enclosed too. That's why the church
and so
killed itself. That's
is
what
that the missionary or whatever?
I think it's. I basically think it's American. I think Christianity as a whole, especially in America and in Europe, it depends on where you look because Christianity is not a monolith. You have different churches in South America and Africa and different things. But if I'm speaking about first world Christianity, generally speaking, I think it basically followed the 1950s creation of demand through marketing because that's how we kept the wartime economy going. It became a marketing service. It offered products wanted. It was titillating and things like that. And you can bring people out of their self-enclosure, it seems at least, by titillating them, by giving them dopamine, right? The problem is the enclosure is dopamine. The enclosure is marketing. It
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
those things. So if the church does it, it actually
Yeah.
ends up in that very enclosure, right? The church has never, ever, ever, ever supposed to position itself to go after the healthy. It has always been supposed to be a faithful presence, a clearing for the sick. Because if people are not sick, if they don't see themselves as sick, to reach them, you have to become like them.
So then, so then the philosopher is the prophet, the shaman, the witch doctor treats those who are humble and
Yes.
willing to admit they have a spiritual disease.
Yes.
And then what do you do to the ignorant, arrogant person who thinks their life is perfect? Well, I guess you just wait for karma to intervene and make them crumble on their own, something like that.
There's a lot to that. Yeah.
Is that
And you see
yeah.
that sounds harsh, but it's not really because of a bad idea must lead to its trajectory. It's just a trajectory thing,
Yeah,
right?
harsh would be, oh, I think they're making a mistake. I'm going to go punch them in the
Yeah, yeah,
face.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's just the logic. You cannot stop a logic from reaching its end. If you're in AA, the end of AA is self-enclosure and eating itself. That is where it goes. There's no way to avoid that. If you don't want auto-cannibalism, you have to get a higher dimensionality. All autonomous anything, all single dimension eventually eats itself because it basically entropy, actually. It just runs out of energy. It has no way to create movement. And so if you want to avoid that, you need higher dimensionality. That's just how it goes. So there's this interesting thing, like when we go to Plato, there's this idea for him too, like, well, how do we save a successful society from destroying itself? His project is a minority. It's like, well, we just need a critical mass. And a critical mass may be 80% because critical mass does not mean majority. It means enough to provide to the
Yeah,
society.
what's Pearson talk about? The Pareto principle where small percentage of the people do a higher percentage of the
Yeah, it's
work. Yeah.
basically that. So, and that's actually really important because if you take that seriously, then
Yeah,
the goal is not
absolutely.
80%, it's 20%. If you can get 20%. So, because I
Right.
really think this
Right.
is important, to change the world is a matter of 20%. That's basically what it
Yeah.
comes down to. If you
Right.
realize that, it's not so impossible. If you think the goal is
That's fair.
80% or
That's fair.
100%, you're screwed. If you realize all you need is 20%, then the problem of institutional logic and incentives and all of that
If you
starts going
get to
away.
the depths, if you get to the most important stuff, then a 5, 10, 20% change is enough. But if
Exactly.
you're on the surface level, then yeah, you need 100% change, and that's never going to happen, so you might as well give up. And so
Exactly.
how do you get to the depths to make a bigger, yeah, the lower percent that has a higher percentage of matter or something like that.
That's exactly right.
The lower percent of substance that has a higher percent of matter, something like
Yes,
that.
that's correct. No, that's exactly right. And so the question is the following. And alas, Charlie, I have work that I have to do. This has been completely delightful. I'm so glad we've
No,
talked
yeah,
in
this has
about
been
15.
insane how long we're going.
I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. I just have, unfortunately, at 4:30, I'll have to run here, but I really appreciate this. To me, this is really important because the question becomes the following. Do we think 20% of the world is sick? Do we think 20% of the world is sick? Do we think enough of a percentage of the world is sick that you can have this percentage? Because that's the
Okay,
question.
is okay, sorry. I heard is 20% of the world sick, and I was like, no, we're all sick. Is 20% of the world aware that
Yes,
they're
that's what I
sick?
mean. That's what I
Yeah,
mean.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah,
Because
that's
for yeah, yeah, yeah. Because when Jesus
because
says,
that's where I was talking about your bias of being on the corner or being
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and you're connected to more people. I think kind of where I'm coming from being new to this is like,
Hmm.
no, I think a quarter of 1% of the people are willing to admit they're sick.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
from my actual lived participatory experience, 99% of people are hell bent that this is the best time to be alive. I
Right.
go
Right.
out into public and I'm like, oh, what's up, man? I haven't seen you in a bit. How you doing? Oh, living the dream, man. Like everybody I know is living the dream. And I'm just like, what? Sorry. So yeah. So yeah, that is 20% sick or is 20% aware
Where
that
that
they're
they're
sick?
sick. Yes. Yes.
From my biased, possibly cynical perspective, no, we're not even close.
Very fair. So for me, when Jesus says I come for the sick, he means the people. Very fair. He means the people who are aware they're sick. Everyone is
Aware.
sick. I'm here for the people that are aware they're
Right,
sick,
right, right.
right? Which I think is
Right.
very important because on the change the world question, there's the okay, maybe let's say 0.2% of people are aware that they are sick. Do we think that 0.2% has the mechanisms in place to move from zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.5 and then from zero point 0.5 to 1 and then can it move from 1 to 20 within 20
So
years?
that's being the change you want to see in the world, because I
Yeah,
don't see that as possible. But I feel like if I were to look back on the last 5 years of my life, I could kind of say I've been trying to do that.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But at the same time, I still feel like I'm just spinning my wheels and going nowhere, and I've done nothing. And so, yeah, that's a tough.
But you know what's so funny is this is why I think the church needs to rethink faith. Faith faith is needed. Faith is going to be characterized by a feeling of doing nothing. Because otherwise it would just be logic, right? Like faith and a feeling of not doing anything
Oh,
strongly
interesting.
go
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
together.
yeah.
Because
Interesting.
if they
Yeah,
didn't,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
then it's not really faith, right? So it's really important. I really think the church again has made a mistake to say once you get faith, you'll understand and you'll see it and you'll have a new life and all of these different things. That's true, but be careful because the new life is a feeling of not doing anything. The feel like that's why the rejection of the world, principalities, like you're gonna feel like you
Yeah,
were doing something, and then you're gonna feel
and
like
that's
you're just kind of spinning your wheels.
yeah, that's one more thing. I think the metaphorical presuppositional framework of our culture is like a productivity culture.
Yes,
And so if you aren't seeing productivity immediately, you're not going to have faith to persist.
exactly.
And that's a big concern of mine looking at my peers and also at my own reflection in the mirror.
Yep.
I don't know if we have that faith or that belief or that integrity to withstand acting in a way that is strange to our productivity culture. Like again, like what I was trying to say with that internalized sage or nage, we have internalized a judge that is materialistic, capitalistic,
Yep.
and productivity focused. And
Hmm.
so when we start to think or act or live in a world where we're not being productive and we're not focused on money and we're not exploiting the world, then our emotions feel weird. Like we don't feel
Yep.
good. Like that feels strange. That
Yep.
feels disorienting.
Hmm.
That feels wrong.
Yep.
Um, And I think that people worship that complex in their mind that projects that sense of reality is wrong.
Yep.
And then they are tempted to buy into the delusion of the stasis of the pretense of the
Yep.
whatever, something
Yep.
like that.
Yeah, well, if moving from flatness to geometry felt right, everyone would have done it, right? It would already be done, right? And it would also be rational to do because it feels like you're doing something. So in order to correct autonomous rationality, it will necessarily have to be in a mode that is going to feel like you're doing nothing because you're starving rationality, basically. You're starving like
Right,
rationality to
right.
make.
But if you've identified with that rational complex, if you think you are your ego, if you think you are your monkey mind, if you
Yep.
think you are your Luciferian intellect, well, then acting in faith and being believing in pursuing God, that all feels wrong.
Yep. That's right.
And so, like,
Yeah.
I guess that's where more of where I am is I'm coming from the my friends and family are only of this materialistic paradigm, and they're not going to do anything that isn't obviously productive and
Yep.
capitalistically efficient or something.
Yep. Yep.
Something that I can't immediately see the return on the investment, I'm not going to invest.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
so that, how do you encourage somebody to play rather than need to invest?
Yep.
And then not framing play as investment because then you're still activating the complex that
Yep.
deals with the investment
Yep.
nomenclature or
Yep.
that metaphorical substrate or whatever. So
Yep.
words, but
Yep.
um,
Yep. Yep.
that activates that complex, that activates that spirit of interpretation.
Yep.
How about that?
No, but what you're saying is the rub. And also too, one, awareness would have to start
Yeah.
with a seeing a lack of awareness or seeing like aware like what did Walker Percy said? He said if the world is standing on their head, the only way to stand upright is to look like you're standing on your head to them, right? And so
Yeah.
that's part of the
Yeah.
problem
Yeah,
is
when the
that.
world's upside down. Yeah. Yeah.
And so necessarily following Peter Berger and all that, if you stand up and everyone's like, you're standing on your head, you will start to say, well, maybe I am on my head now. And maybe everyone else was standing up because there's no plausibility structure. And that's why
That's huge.
these spiritual initiatives are so difficult and seem to fundamentally have some sort of small movement structure to them, right? Because of the reinforcement
Yeah,
of.
because the salience landscape is so biased
Yes.
that
Mhm.
goodness doesn't have salience or
Yes.
something like that.
Absolutely. Well, a few things that I'll just say that I find encouraging. That because the
Yeah, please,
situation,
please. I've been doom and gloom.
no,
We need
no,
some
your
encouragement.
realism. I like realism because it also again it's actually it's kind of an empirical question of what has changed the world. And to say something very large, the world is changed by people who wondered if they were wasting their life. Because if it
Yeah.
didn't, it couldn't be a paradigm change. Now, when I say change the world, I don't mean influential or governments. Obviously, governments have had impacts on the world. I'm
Not
talking
just
about,
accelerating the known structures, but
yes,
totally creating different structures.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm talking
Okay.
changing the world, as in different in kind. Those people, here's the issue.
Right. And what kind of narcissist wants to change the world, you know?
Exactly. That's correct. That's the other issue. So you have to wonder if you're being a narcissist. You have to wonder if you're doing anything. There's a certain mental struggle you must go through. But that mental structure is also the character creation of being the model
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
paradigm.
Yeah.
And so
And so
there's
that's what I see is people who have never wrestled with this stuff. People
yeah,
who have no character. People who
yeah,
are totally
yeah,
disintegrated and are NPCs and are possessed by
yeah,
mimetic complexes.
yeah, yeah,
And it's
exactly.
just so horrifying.
Yeah.
And
And you
so,
can see why people then
so thank
what
you for telling me that there's 1,000 people out there trying,
yes,
because that's
sir.
news.
Yes, sir. Well, and also you can see why people have therefore
I mean, I
gotten.
don't believe you, but it's good to hear.
But that's okay. But you have
It's
to
just
have the option
hearsay.
of not
I haven't
believing.
seen it with my own eyes.
That's
So
perfectly fine. Stay the faithful presence, and you
yeah.
know, the encounters and surprises are there, right? Surprise and is the cynicism can be surprised in the faithful presence. But it's very fair on what you're saying. Um, for me, also, like when you realize, like, it has to be the case that you wonder if you're doing anything and you wonder if you're kind of crazy, that would necessarily be the condition
Which I do.
of opening attention. Well, one, you can be more confident with that feeling as it doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong course. And that's a gift. Like the moment you go, wait, this is the feeling I should expect if we are moving into awareness. Oh, well, maybe I can't assume, therefore I'm doing something
Okay.
wrong. I have to give it time to
Yeah, yeah,
blossom.
yeah.
I have to give
So
it,
that's where that difference becomes exciting. That's
yes.
where that tension becomes meaningful. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's
Okay.
exactly right.
Okay.
The second thing I would say is that I don't think it's by chance that basically we've treated philosophy and the humanities and all of that as second to the STEMs, because if you really do the humanities, they start with a horror. You see all this problem. Like if you actually do the humanities, humanities are to make you human by lifting awareness. Now they're not taught that way; they've committed suicide. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
but you can also understand why people have actually taken the humanities and made them fit into trivia structures or careerism or all of that. Because if you actually do it, it begins with this. Oh my gosh, there's a great sleep going on in a Gurdjieffian way. There's a great lack of awareness. So we've kind of wanted the humanities to not matter, because if they have some truth to them, then we have to face the void. We have to face this kind of horror, right?
Yeah. Interesting.
Also,
Interesting.
too, I'll note, so this is where I get into some things I find encouraging.
Hmm.
I do think the very fact, if there is a strong connection between the lack of awareness and mental health dropping, the very fact that psychoanalysis is growing in prominence and therapy is evidence of people who are aware they're sick, even if they don't have the word for it. They are aware of a problem. Now,
Sure.
pharmaceutical industry and capitalism is rushing in to grab them, but it is showing.
To pervert it and to confuse it. They're
That's
taking a
correct.
pure underlying impulse of recognizing something's wrong,
Yes.
and they're saying, "Oh, I know what's wrong. It's this oversimplified problem, and
Yes.
here's my oversimplified
Yes.
solution."
Yes.
And so now we're tempted to substitute these, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
thoughts. Yes.
and the reason why is if the meaning crisis is real, if the mental health crisis is real, this is actually evidence that there are mechanisms in place in the world itself that are making people realize they're sick. Now they may misinterpret that sickness as evidence that they need a pill, but at least they've taken a step on the path, right? There's
Sure,
a step
sure,
on the
sure.
path, right? So this is where the meaning crisis is a sign of hope. This is where the meaning crisis actually has certain benefits. Likewise, if the economy is failing, if more and more the average person feels like they can't get ahead, that no matter how much they work, they can't save up, then you eventually start questioning the system. You start going, wait a minute,
Right,
maybe it lied to me. Now
right.
that is a recognition that the system is sick. Now that can be
Yeah, if I'm
perverted.
failing, it's probably my fault. But if everybody's failing, it's probably the system's fault.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
has to be an issue, as I think Mills put it, not a trouble. A trouble is just an individual thing. An issue is a social structural matter, right? And
sure,
so
sure.
what ends up happening is people now that realization the system is sick could lead to getting captured in political extremism or withdrawal or whatever, but it is a step on the path toward awareness, right? So all of
Mhm.
these, even if they're not necessarily leading toward the attention, are nevertheless a step of that possibility at a greater spread. And the more
Right.
and more there are models to show the correct way to take that step, the correct path, the higher the probability we can move from point 0.01 to 0.02 to 1, then to, and keep in mind, I actually think the rules of numbers are that the more it's easier to move, it is hard to move from point 0.1 to point 0.2, but it's easier to move from point 0.2 to point 0.3 than to move from 1 to point 0.2, 4 to 5, 6 to 7, because you start getting a movement of a self-reinforcement of the
Mm-hmm.
people, right?
You get the
It is
momentum. Yeah.
not equal difficulty from 0.1 to 20%, because every step has an enforcement mechanism. They think they call that the threshold theory or something like that, and I think it's true. Um,
Sure.
all of that gives me encouragement to see the meaning crisis as a sign of hope. The other thing that gives me encouragement is I actually think you only need to do one or two important decisions or actions in your life to actually have a significant contribution to this movement. It is not a thing where every single day, like I think people's lives are basically determined by 5 decisions, not 500, but like 5 major decisions where they're in the right place at the right time, where say the spirit can use them or they were prepared, right? If you realize this, then it's not that every single day you have to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
create attention. You have to be ready for the 5 or 6 times when it counts, when it appears. And I think this is true. I think this is how life works. That one can give you a rest where you don't have to be every single day, generating attention or whatever. You have to be working on yourself to be prepared for those surprises and encounters when they come that you're able to meet, right?
Yeah.
And when
So
you
it's about
realize
cultivating the character that can then be faithfully present, that then can then react appropriately.
that's exactly right. And it's a few things that you have to do. That's also encouraging because then when you start saying, well, how do I reform the entire school system? How do I get to become the head of a different institution? It's not about that. It's about the preparation for these key moments.
How do you become a better person?
Yeah.
That can then exercise your agency appropriately, regardless of the facticity that you're thrown into. Something
yes,
like that.
That's exactly right. And then, if that is also, and then alas, I've really enjoyed this, Charlie. If that is also, the question becomes the following. Are these online conversations, our philosophy, is the work that you're doing making you more virtuous in that way? Do you have reason to think that it is? You might be wrong, but do you have reason to believe that it is? And that doesn't mean it always will. And that doesn't mean there isn't adjustments that need to be done here or there. But can you say, I am better for this? Not in an egoic way, but because you're more attuned to something beyond you. You're more attuned to other people. You have a better sense of the horizon that is a mystery and that is unknown, that in knowing you feel more like a human being. Do these interactions contribute to this at this point in time? Maybe in a year they won't. Maybe in 6 months they won't. But are they at this time?
The structure function. Yeah. Okay.
And if you can answer yes, then that, given everything else we've said, from that single premise, is enough reason to keep doing it. Because if the ultimate change of the world has to start off from that to lead to everything else, then that's where you start. And even if it doesn't lead to everything else, it nevertheless has this vertical dimensional attunement, this greater awareness without which it is impossible to extend our humanity. Without it, it is inevitable we have our humanity replaced. And I certainly feel that way talking with you. So I'll keep doing it. And Charlie, I've really enjoyed this, sir. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me, man. Let's do it again sometime.
Yes, sir. We will. Thank you, Charlie. I've appreciated it.
Cool.
All the best.
Have a great day, Daniel.
You too. Thank you, sir. All the best.